The winter of 1878 arrived in New England with a ferocity that locals hadn't seen in decades. The hills around Millbrook were covered by a thick layer of snow that seemed never to melt, creating an almost absolute isolation between the rural properties. At the top of the highest of these hills stood Stonecroft Manor, an imposing Victorian stone structure that dominated the landscape like a medieval castle. The manor had belonged to the Grayson family for 3 generations. Abraham Grayson, the current patriarch, had transformed the modest family mining business into an industrial empire that extended throughout the northeastern United States. His steel factories and coal mines employed thousands of workers, but his wealth came accompanied by a dark reputation. Workers whispered about inhumane working conditions, frequent accidents that were covered up, and a calculating coldness that Abraham demonstrated in the face of others' suffering. The Grayson family lived isolated from the rest of the community, emerging from their stone fortress only for essential business or for the traditional New Year's Eve party. This annual celebration had become a peculiar tradition. It wasn't a party in the conventional sense, but rather a demonstration of power and wealth that served more to intimidate than to celebrate. The few guests who attended were mainly business partners, local politicians, and other figures that Abraham considered useful for his enterprises. Thomas Whitmore was the family physician and one of the few outsiders who had regular access to the manor. At 45 years old, he was a man of medium stature, prematurely grey hair, and penetrating eyes that seemed to capture details that others ignored. A Harvard Medical School graduate, Thomas had returned to his hometown of Millbrook after years of practicing in Boston, seeking a simpler and more peaceful life. However, the tranquility he sought was quickly replaced by growing unease. As the family's physician, Thomas was frequently called to the manor to treat everything from common colds to more serious injuries of family members. During these visits, he observed the family dynamics with the clinical eye of someone accustomed to diagnosing not only physical ailments, but also the ills that afflicted the human spirit. Thomas noticed things that others preferred to ignore: the constant tension between family members, the looks laden with resentment, the conversations that ceased abruptly when he entered a room. There was something deeply disturbing about the atmosphere at Stonecroft Manor, a feeling that dark secrets hid behind the stone walls and Persian rugs. Abraham Grayson was a man who inspired both respect and fear. At 68 years old, he maintained an erect and imposing posture, with perfectly combed white hair and blue eyes as cold as winter ice. His presence dominated any environment, and his deep voice carried an authority that few dared to question. In the Millbrook community, Abraham was seen as a benefactor, despite suspicions about his business methods. He had financed the construction of the new church, donated funds to the local school, and offered jobs to hundreds of families in the region. This public generosity, however, masked a calculating and ruthless nature that revealed itself only to those who knew him intimately. Abraham governed his family with an iron fist, treating wife, children, and grandchildren more like pieces on a chessboard than as human beings with their own wills. Each family member had a specific role to play in his plans, and any deviation from this script was met with severe consequences. Eleanor Grayson, Abraham's wife, was a 62-year-old woman who had long ago lost any trace of the vivacity she possessed in her youth. Daughter of an aristocratic Boston family, she had married Abraham for social convenience. But years of marriage had transformed her into a ghostly figure who wandered the manor's corridors like a lost soul. The eldest son, Marcus Grayson, 38 years old, was the apparent heir to the family empire. A law graduate, he managed the legal aspects of his father's business, but his more sensitive nature frequently conflicted with Abraham's brutal methods. Victoria Grayson, the youngest daughter at 32, had recently returned to the manor after the end of a disastrous marriage in New York. Intelligent and determined, she was perhaps the only person in the family who dared to confront Abraham directly, which created constant tension between father and daughter. Marcus was married to Catherine, a gentle 35-year-old woman who tried to maintain some normalcy in the lives of her 2 young children, James 8 and Sarah 6. Stonecroft Manor was an imposing 3-story structure, built of local grey stone that gave it a somber appearance even on the sunniest days. The architectural design followed the Gothic Victorian style, with pointed towers, arched windows, and decorative gargoyles that seemed to observe visitors with stone eyes. The interior of the manor was equally impressive and intimidating, The entrance hall featured a vaulted ceiling over 6 meters high, with a crystal chandelier weighing almost a ton. The main living room, where the family gathered for formal meals and special occasions, was dominated by a black marble fireplace and a German pendulum clock that had been specially imported to mark New Year's celebrations. This clock, a masterful piece of 18th century engineering, not only marked the hours but also played elaborate melodies every hour on the hour. The isolation of the manor was both physical and social. Located at the top of a steep hill, the property was accessible only by a winding road that became practically impassable during snowstorms. This strategic location had been deliberately chosen by Abraham, who valued privacy above all else. During the winter of 1878, the isolation became even more pronounced. A series of storms had blocked the main road for weeks, leaving the Grayson family completely isolated from the outside world. As the end of 1878 approached, the atmosphere at Stonecroft Manor became increasingly tense. Thomas noticed during his medical visits that family members seemed to be under constant pressure. Eleanor had developed a persistent cough that didn't respond to any treatment. Marcus showed signs of extreme stress with deep, dark circles and trembling hands, and Victoria had become even more confrontational with her father. The children, James and Sarah, who normally brought some joy to the somber manor, seemed to have lost their natural vivacity. They played in silence, as if they had learned that any display of happiness could be seen as an affront to the seriousness that Abraham demanded from his family. Thomas began to suspect that there was something more than simple family tension at play. During a visit in mid-December, he noticed that Abraham seemed to be planning something special for the New Year's celebration. The patriarch had hired additional staff, ordered special supplies, and even had a French chef brought from Boston to prepare an elaborate banquet. What most intrigued Thomas was the secretive nature of the preparations. Abraham had installed new locks on several doors of the manor, including his private office and the wine cellar. He had also dismissed most of the servants, keeping only the most loyal and long-standing employees. During a casual conversation with Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for more than 20 years, Thomas learned that Abraham had received several mysterious visits in recent weeks. Well-dressed men arrived at the manor during the night, met with Abraham in his office for hours, and left before dawn. "I've never seen Mr. Grayson so determined," Mrs. Henderson had commented with a worried expression. "It's as if he's planning something very important, something that will change everything." Thomas also noticed changes in Abraham's behavior during his medical consultations. The patriarch, who had always been controlled and calculating, now demonstrated an almost feverish intensity. His eyes shone with a determination that bordered on obsession, and he spoke about the family's future in a way that Thomas found deeply disturbing. "Dr. Whitmore," Abraham had said during his last consultation, "sometimes a man must make difficult decisions to protect his legacy, decisions that others may not understand, but that are necessary to ensure that everything he has worked for is not destroyed." On the eve of New Year's Eve, Thomas received an urgent telegram from Abraham requesting his presence at the manor. When he arrived, he found the family gathered in the living room, but the atmosphere was strangely solemn for an occasion that should have been festive. Abraham announced that he had decided to make the 1878 New Year's celebration a special occasion, one that would be remembered forever. The morning of December 31st, 1878, dawned with an unsettling silence that seemed to envelop Stonecroft Manor like a shroud. Thomas Whitmore arrived at the property around 10 o'clock, as requested by Abraham in the previous night's telegram. What he found was a complete transformation of the family atmosphere he had known for years. Abraham had implemented what he called a family celebration protocol, a set of rigid rules that, according to him, would ensure that the night was perfect and memorable. All family members were to be present in the living room at exactly 6 p.m., dressed in their finest clothes. No one could leave the manor after that time, and all communications with the outside world would be suspended until the following day. "It's a tradition I'm instituting," Abraham explained to Thomas with a seriousness that seemed disproportionate to the occasion. "A night when the Grayson family focuses only on itself, without distractions from the outside world." What most disturbed Thomas was the way Abraham had presented these rules, not as suggestions or requests, but as unquestionable orders. He had even confiscated the keys to all the rooms, claiming he wanted to ensure that no one would isolate themselves during the celebration. During his routine medical consultation with Eleanor, Thomas noticed something that left him deeply uneasy. The family matriarch, who had always been a reserved but polite woman, seemed to be in a state of extreme anxiety. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and she constantly looked toward the door as if expecting someone to enter at any moment. "Doctor," she whispered when Abraham left the room for a moment, "there's something you need to know about my husband. He's not the man he appears to be." Before she could continue, Abraham returned and Eleanor immediately fell silent, resuming her usual submissive posture. But Thomas had caught the desperation in her eyes, a silent plea for help that left him deeply disturbed. What most intrigued Thomas was how Abraham's behavior completely contradicted his known personality. The patriarch had always been a man who valued absolute control, but who exercised that control in a subtle and calculated manner. Now he was being openly authoritarian and almost paranoid in his demands. During lunch, Abraham announced that he had prepared a special toast for midnight, a drink that he himself had selected and that would be served exclusively to the family. He had even dismissed the French chef he had hired, insisting that he himself would supervise the preparation of everything that would be consumed during the night. "I want this to be a truly intimate celebration," Abraham explained, but there was something in his voice that suggested much darker motivations than simple desire for family intimacy. Thomas observed carefully the reactions of the other family members to the changes implemented by Abraham. Marcus, normally deferential to his father, showed clear signs of resistance. During a private conversation, he confided his concerns to Thomas. "My father is acting strangely, Doctor." "Whitmore," Marcus said, looking around nervously to ensure he wasn't being overheard. "He's been talking about protecting the family legacy and ensuring that our lineage is remembered forever. I don't understand what he means, but it makes me very uneasy." Victoria, for her part, had become even more confrontational. During a heated discussion that Thomas partially witnessed, she accused her father of planning something terrible and demanded to know what his true intentions were for the night. "You can't keep us prisoners in our own home," she shouted, but Abraham simply smiled with a coldness that made Thomas shiver. As the day progressed, Thomas noticed that Abraham was implementing preparations that went far beyond a simple family celebration. He had ordered all the first-floor windows to be sealed, claiming he wanted to keep the heat inside the house. He had also instructed the few remaining staff to retire to their quarters in the basement and not emerge until the following day, regardless of what they might hear. Most disturbing of all was when Thomas saw Abraham locking the manor's main door with heavy chains and padlocks, something completely unnecessary for a normal family celebration. "Security precautions," Abraham explained when questioned, but his explanation made no sense. Stonecroft Manor was isolated on top of a hill, surrounded by miles of deep snow. What kind of external threat could justify such measures? Around 4 p.m., while Abraham was busy with final preparations, Thomas decided to investigate on his own. He managed to access Abraham's office and made a discovery that chilled him to the bone. On the patriarch's desk was a document that appeared to be some kind of will or final declaration. Although he couldn't read the entire content due to limited time, Thomas saw phrases that deeply alarmed him. "To preserve the honor of the Grayson family, before the truth is revealed, and most disturbing of all, a dignified end for a noble lineage." There were also a series of newspaper clippings scattered across the desk, all related to financial scandals and investigations into questionable business practices. Thomas recognized some of the names mentioned. They were Abraham's business associates who had been publicly exposed and ruined in recent months. When Abraham returned to the office and found Thomas there, his reaction was surprisingly calm. Instead of being furious about the invasion of privacy, he simply smiled and closed the door behind him. "I see you've discovered my little secrets, Dr. Whitmore," Abraham said, his voice laden with strange resignation. "Perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps you can understand the necessity of what must be done." Abraham then revealed that he had received information that a federal investigation into his business practices would be announced in the first week of January. Evidence had been collected about bribes, inhumane working conditions, and even about industrial accidents that had been deliberately caused to eliminate workers who threatened to expose the truth. "My family built an empire on foundations that, I admit, were not entirely legal," Abraham confessed with a coldness that shocked Thomas. "But I will not allow this empire to be destroyed by bureaucrats and reformers. I will not allow the Grayson name to be dragged through the mud." With terrifying calm, Abraham explained his plan to Thomas. He had decided that if the Grayson family could not continue living with honor, then it would die with dignity. The New Year's celebration would actually be a farewell ceremony, a final toast before the entire family departed this world together. "You understand, Dr. Whitmore," Abraham said, his eyes shining with fanatic determination, "that sometimes death is preferable to dishonor. My family will not be publicly humiliated. We will not be dragged through the courts like common criminals." Thomas was horrified to realize that Abraham was serious. The patriarch had meticulously planned what he saw as an honorable collective suicide to preserve the family legacy. When Thomas tried to leave the office to warn the other family members, he discovered that Abraham had locked the door. The patriarch held a small pistol, not pointed directly at Thomas, but clearly visible as a threat. "I'm afraid I cannot allow you to interfere, Doctor," Abraham said calmly. "You are a man of medicine. Surely you understand that sometimes it's necessary to amputate a limb to save the body. The Grayson family is that limb, and society is the body that must be protected from our corruption." At exactly 6 p.m., Abraham escorted Thomas back to the living room, where the entire family was gathered as ordered. The environment was festively decorated, with lit candles, fresh flowers that had been brought from a special greenhouse on the property, and the table set with the family's finest china. The German clock on the wall marked time with its relentless mechanical precision, each tick echoing in the room like a countdown to something terrible. Abraham took his place at the head of the table, smiling at his family with an expression that mixed paternal love with dark determination. "My dear family," he began, raising a champagne glass, "tonight we will mark not only the end of a year, but the beginning of our eternity together." Thomas looked around the table and saw fear in the eyes of each family member. They knew something was terribly wrong, but they didn't yet fully understand the extent of Abraham's plan. As the night progressed at Stonecroft Manor, Thomas Whitmore realized he needed to act quickly to fully understand Abraham's plan and find a way to stop it. Using his position as the family physician and keen observer, he began to systematically collect evidence and information that could be crucial to saving the lives at risk. During dinner, Thomas carefully observed Abraham's behavior and began to identify a disturbing pattern in his actions. The patriarch was following a very specific, almost ritualistic protocol in his interactions with each family member. Abraham had positioned each person in a specific place at the table, not by chance or tradition, but following a logic that Thomas began to decipher. Eleanor was to his right, Marcus to his left, Victoria next to Marcus, and the children, James and Sarah, were positioned so they could be easily observed by all the adults. During the meal, Abraham made a point of personally serving each dish to each family member, something he had never done before. He also rigorously controlled what each person drank, serving specific wine to the adults and a special juice he had prepared for the children. Thomas noticed that Abraham was following a very precise schedule. Every half hour, he discreetly consulted a pocket watch and made notes in a small notebook he kept beside him. It was as if he were conducting a scientific experiment, carefully monitoring each variable. Taking advantage of moments when Abraham was distracted or had temporarily left the room, Thomas began to systematically document everything he observed. He used his medical notebook, in which he normally recorded symptoms and treatments, to create a detailed record of the night's events. Thomas Whitmore's record. December 31st, 1878, 7:30 p.m. Abraham serves special red wine to adults. Bottle without label, apparently from his personal cellar. Eleanor initially refuses, but is persuaded to drink. 7:45 p.m. Marcus complains of slight discomfort. Abraham suggests it's just nervousness about the celebration. 8:01 p.m. Victoria questions the strange taste of the wine. Abraham explains it's a special vintage, reserved for important occasions. 8:15 p.m. The children begin to get drowsy after drinking the juice. Catherine expresses concern, but Abraham assures her it's normal after a long day. 8:30 p.m. Eleanor develops tremors in her hands. When I offer to examine her, Abraham refuses, saying it's just emotion. Thomas realized he was documenting symptoms of progressive poisoning. The pattern was clear. Abraham was administering some type of slow-acting toxic substance, calculated to take effect gradually throughout the night. As he observed more carefully, Thomas began to understand the sinister logic behind Abraham's plan. The patriarch wasn't simply planning an impulsive collective suicide. He had devised a method that would allow the family to spend their final hours together, apparently celebrating before the poison did its fatal work. The choice of New Year's Eve was no coincidence. Abraham wanted the family to die exactly at midnight, symbolically marking the end not only of the year, but of the Grayson lineage. The German clock on the wall wasn't just a decorative piece, it was the timer for his macabre countdown. Thomas also realized that Abraham had chosen a poison that would cause a relatively peaceful and dignified death. The symptoms he was observing, drowsiness, mild tremors, gradual discomfort, suggested something like arsenic in carefully calculated doses, or perhaps a combination of substances that would cause organ failure slowly but irreversibly. Abraham had established an elaborate system to monitor the progress of his plan. Thomas noticed that the patriarch kept a detailed record in his notebook, noting the exact time each person showed specific symptoms. It was as if he were conducting a scientific experiment on his own family. More disturbing still, Abraham seemed to be adjusting doses as necessary. When Eleanor showed signs of resistance to the poison, he discreetly added something extra to her wine. When the children fell asleep more quickly than expected, he seemed satisfied and made a specific notation. During one of Abraham's temporary absences from the living room, Thomas managed to sneak into the patriarch's office, which had been left unlocked by oversight. What he found there horrified him with the extent and meticulousness of the plan. The office had been transformed into a kind of improvised laboratory. There were flasks of various chemical substances, precision scales for measuring doses, and a set of syringes and medical equipment that Abraham had obviously acquired for his sinister purposes. On the main desk, Thomas found what appeared to be a detailed manual that Abraham had written about his plan. The document, titled Protocol for Preserving Family Honor, contained precise instructions about dosages, schedules, and even about how to position the bodies after death to create the scene he desired. Even more shocking was the discovery of a long manifesto that Abraham had written, explaining his motivations and justifying his actions. The document revealed the extent of his paranoia and his distorted vision of family honor. The Grayson family has built a 3-generation legacy based on principles of strength, determination, and superiority. I will not allow this legacy to be tainted by the moral weakness of a society that does not understand the necessity of extreme measures for progress. Federal investigators and social reformers want to destroy everything I have worked for, expose methods that, while necessary, would be misunderstood by small minds. I prefer that my family be remembered as tragic victims of a cruel fate rather than as criminals exposed publicly. In death, we will find the purification that life can no longer offer. Our names will be preserved in memory as a noble family that faced adversity with dignity until the end. Thomas realized he was dealing with a man who had completely lost touch with moral reality. Abraham had convinced himself that he was performing an act of love and protection, when in fact he was committing the murder of his own family. Continuing his investigation of the office, Thomas discovered that Abraham had prepared even a contingency plan in case something went wrong. There were detailed instructions on how he himself would commit suicide if discovered before the plan was completed, and even pre-written letters to authorities explaining the events as a family suicide pact, motivated by insurmountable financial difficulties. Abraham had even prepared an alternative scene in case someone tried to interfere. There were weapons hidden at various points in the manor, and instructions on how to quickly eliminate any witness who might expose the truth about his motivations. Among the chemical flasks in the office, Thomas made a discovery that gave him a spark of hope. Abraham had prepared not only the poisons, but also antidotes, apparently as a precaution in case he changed his mind at the last moment or needed to save someone specific. The antidotes were clearly labeled and accompanied by instructions on dosages and administration methods. Thomas realized that Abraham, in his scientific arrogance, had meticulously documented not only how to kill his family, but also how to save them. Consulting the detailed schedule that Abraham had prepared, Thomas discovered that the patriarch had calculated that the fatal effects of the poison would manifest exactly at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before midnight. This would allow the family to make one final toast together before succumbing, creating the dramatic scene that Abraham desired. The plan was of macabre precision. At 11:55 p.m., the family would be gathered around the clock for the final countdown. At 11:58 p.m., the poisons would take effect, causing quick but apparently peaceful death. At midnight, when the clock struck 12 chimes, the Grayson family would be dead, but still seated in their positions, as if they had simply fallen asleep during the celebration. When Thomas returned to the living room, it was already 10:30 p.m., and the symptoms of poisoning were becoming more pronounced in all family members. Eleanor was visibly weak, Marcus had difficulty staying upright, and even Victoria, who had been the most resistant, was beginning to show signs of discomfort. The children were deeply asleep, but Thomas noticed that their breathing was becoming more labored. Catherine, who had drunk less wine because she was caring for the children, was still relatively alert, but clearly confused about what was happening. Thomas realized he had less than an hour and a half to act. He needed to find a way to administer the antidotes without Abraham noticing, or find a way to neutralize the patriarch before it was too late. At 11:15 p.m., with only 45 minutes remaining until the fateful midnight, Thomas Whitmore made the most courageous decision of his life. He could no longer remain a passive observer while an entire family walked toward death. It was time to confront Abraham Grayson directly and completely expose the truth about his macabre plan. Thomas had managed to discreetly remove some of the antidote flasks from Abraham's office, hiding them in his medical bag. More importantly, he had mentally photographed the most incriminating pages of Abraham's manifesto and protocol, memorizing specific details that could be used as irrefutable evidence. When Abraham rose to make what he called final preparations for the midnight toast, Thomas seized the opportunity to act. He went to the center of the living room and, with a firm and clear voice, made an announcement that would completely change the dynamics of the night. "Members of the Grayson family," Thomas said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "I need to inform you of something urgent about what is happening here tonight." Abraham, who was returning to the room with a special bottle of champagne for the final toast, stopped abruptly at the entrance. His eyes narrowed when he realized that Thomas had taken control of the situation. With the family gathered and Abraham forced to listen, Thomas began to systematically expose everything he had discovered. He explained about the poison that had been gradually administered throughout the night, about the meticulous schedule that Abraham had prepared, and about the true purpose of the New Year's celebration. "Your patriarch is not celebrating the New Year with you," Thomas declared, looking directly at each family member. "He is executing a plan to murder all of you before the clock strikes midnight." The initial reaction was one of total incredulity. Eleanor weakly shook her head. Marcus tried to stand to protest, and Victoria looked at her father with an expression of growing horror. But as Thomas presented the specific evidence, the symptoms everyone was experiencing, Abraham's strange behavior, the secret preparations, the terrible truth began to become undeniable. Thomas then revealed the most shocking discovery of all, Abraham's ideological manifesto and the true extent of his commercial crimes. He explained about the imminent federal investigations, about the workers who had died due to Abraham's negligent practices, and about the financial empire built on corruption and blood. "Your father is not trying to protect the family's honor," Thomas said, his voice laden with moral indignation. "He is trying to escape justice by destroying the only witnesses to his crimes. You, his own family." Abraham, who had remained silent until then, finally exploded in fury. "Dr. Whitmore," he roared, "you have no right to interfere in family matters. You don't understand the complexity of the situation." Thomas then recited from memory specific excerpts from Abraham's manifesto, exposing the distorted mentality behind the plan. He revealed how Abraham had rationalized the murder of his family as an act of love, how he had convinced himself that death was preferable to public exposure. He wrote, and I quote exactly, Thomas said, "I prefer that my family be remembered as tragic victims rather than as exposed criminals. He is willing to kill all of you to preserve his own reputation." The revelation had a devastating effect on the family. Eleanor began to cry silently, finally understanding why she had felt so apprehensive. Marcus, even in his weakened state, managed to stand and confront his father directly. "Father," Marcus said, his voice trembling with emotion, "is this true? Did you really plan to kill us?" Abraham's response was even more shocking than Thomas had anticipated. Instead of denying the accusations or showing remorse, the patriarch completely assumed his actions with a coldness that froze everyone's blood in the room. "Yes," Abraham said simply, his voice calm and controlled. "Everything Dr. Whitmore said is true, and I would do it again because it's the only way to protect what we've built." He then began to explain his distorted logic to the stunned family. "You don't understand the world out there," he said. gesturing toward the snow-covered windows. "They want to destroy us, humiliate us publicly, drag our name through the mud. I will not allow that." Abraham revealed that he had received information that the federal investigation included evidence that he had deliberately caused industrial accidents to eliminate workers who threatened to expose his practices. There were documents proving bribes to government officials, falsification of safety records, and even commissioned murders of investigative journalists. When he realized that his family was turning against him and that Thomas had completely exposed his plan, Abraham activated his contingency plan. He drew a pistol he had hidden in his jacket and pointed it directly at Thomas. "Dr. Whitmore," Abraham said with terrifying calm, "you have forced my hand. Now we'll have to accelerate the schedule." He then revealed that he had prepared a concentrated dose of poison that could kill instantly, and that he was willing to use it on anyone who tried to stop his plan. "If you cannot die with dignity," he declared, "then you will die as traitors to the family." It was at this crucial moment that Thomas revealed his ace in the hole. He showed the antidote flasks he had taken from Abraham's office, explaining that the patriarch himself had prepared the substances that could save the family. "You were so meticulous in your planning," Thomas said, "that you even prepared antidotes. This proves that on some level, you knew what you were doing was wrong." The revelation of the antidotes had a devastating psychological effect on Abraham. For the first time that night, he seemed to lose his composure, realizing that his own excessive preparation had provided the means to defeat his plan. What followed was a desperate struggle for control of the situation. Marcus, even weakened by the poison, managed to move toward his father to try to disarm him. Victoria, showing courage that surprised everyone, threw herself at Abraham to prevent him from shooting Thomas. During the struggle, the pistol fired, but the shot went upward, shattering the crystal chandelier and sending glittering fragments throughout the room. Abraham, realizing he had lost control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt to complete his plan. He ran toward the table where he had left the concentrated dose of poison, planning to force each family member to ingest it. But Thomas, anticipating this possibility, had secretly replaced the concentrated poison with water during his investigation of the office. With Abraham finally contained and disarmed, Thomas was able to administer the antidotes to each family member. As the substances took effect and the symptoms of poisoning began to diminish, the complete truth about Abraham Grayson was finally revealed. He wasn't just a corrupt businessman trying to escape justice. He was a man who had completely lost his humanity in the pursuit of power and control. His willingness to murder his own family revealed a sociopathy that went far beyond simple greed or fear of exposure. When the German clock finally struck the 12 chimes of midnight, marking the arrival of 1879, the Grayson family was alive, but forever changed. The sound of the chimes, which Abraham had planned as a soundtrack to his family's death, became instead a symbol of their survival and rebirth. Abraham, defeated and exposed, collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of his crimes. "I wanted to protect them," he murmured repeatedly, but his words sounded empty even to himself. The new year that Abraham had planned would never come for his family, instead became the first day of their true freedom. Freedom from fear, from secrets, and from the tyranny of a man who had confused control with love and murder with protection. In surviving his final terrible plan, they had not only saved their lives but reclaimed their humanity. The dawn of January the 2nd, 1879, brought with it a strange sense of rebirth to Stonecroft Manor. The house that had been a prison of secrets and fear for so many years now felt different, as if the very walls had been cleansed by the truth that had finally been spoken within them. Thomas Whitmore remained at the manor for several days, monitoring the family's recovery from both the physical effects of the poisoning and the psychological trauma of their ordeal. Eleanor Grayson, perhaps the most transformed of all, sat by the window in the morning light, watching the snow fall gently on the grounds where she had lived in fear for so many years. For the first time in decades, her hands were steady, her breathing calm. The woman who had been reduced to a shadow of herself under Abraham's domination was slowly beginning to remember who she had been before her marriage, before the years of psychological imprisonment. "Dr. Whitmore," she said softly as Thomas checked her pulse, "I keep thinking about all the signs I ignored, all the times I should have spoken up. How many people might still be alive if I had found the courage to expose him sooner?" Thomas set down his medical bag and sat beside her. Mrs. Grayson, you were as much a victim as anyone else. Abraham's control over this family was absolute, and he used fear and manipulation to maintain that control. The courage you showed that night, when you finally stood up to him, saved not only your own life, but the lives of your children and grandchildren. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking haggard but determined. In his hands, he carried a stack of documents, business records, correspondence, and financial statements that he had been gathering from his father's office. "Mother, Dr. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he had discovered. "I've been going through Father's papers, trying to understand the full extent of what he was involved in. It's worse than we imagined." Over the next several hours, Marcus laid out the evidence of Abraham's crimes with the methodical precision of the lawyer he had been trained to be. The documents revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond simple business malpractice. There were records of bribes paid to safety inspectors to overlook dangerous working conditions, correspondence with other industrialists about fixing prices and wages, and most damning of all, detailed plans for eliminating workers who had threatened to expose the truth about conditions in the factories. "He kept records of everything," Marcus said, his voice filled with disgust and disbelief. "Every bribe, every threat, every accident that wasn't really an accident. It's as if he was proud of what he was doing, as if he saw it all as necessary business practices." Victoria, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. Unlike the others, she showed no surprise at the revelations about their father's crimes. "I suspected," she said simply. "Not the extent of it, but I knew he was capable of terrible things. The way he treated our family was just a smaller version of how he treated everyone else." The discovery of Abraham's detailed records presented the family with a moral dilemma. They could destroy the evidence and try to preserve what remained of the family's reputation, or they could turn everything over to the authorities and ensure that justice was served, even if it meant complete public disgrace. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. Eleanor, despite her years of submission to Abraham's will, was the first to speak. "We turn over everything," she said firmly. "Every document, every record, every piece of evidence. The people he hurt deserve justice, and we have no right to protect his memory at their expense." Thomas watched with admiration as the family made this choice. It would have been easy to take the path of self-preservation, to destroy the evidence and claim ignorance of Abraham's crimes. Instead, they chose the harder path of accountability and justice, even knowing it would bring shame and financial ruin upon themselves. The process of turning over the evidence to federal investigators took several weeks. During this time, the family remained at Stonecroft Manor, but the atmosphere was completely different from the oppressive environment that had existed under Abraham's rule. For the first time in years, there was laughter in the halls, genuine conversation at meals, and a sense of hope for the future. The children, James and Sarah, were perhaps the most resilient. Young enough to adapt quickly, but old enough to understand that something momentous had happened, they began to flourish in the new environment of openness and honesty. Catherine, their mother, marveled at how quickly they recovered from the trauma, their natural childhood joy reasserting itself once the atmosphere of fear had been lifted. "Children are remarkably resilient," Thomas observed as he watched James and Sarah playing in the snow outside the manor. "They adapt to new circumstances much more quickly than adults. What matters most is that they now have a stable, loving environment in which to grow." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Abraham's meticulous record-keeping made the prosecutor's job almost too easy. Within months, dozens of his associates were arrested, safety violations were exposed across multiple industries, and a wave of reforms swept through the industrial sector of New England. The Grayson family's cooperation with the investigation was noted and appreciated by the authorities. While they could not escape the stigma of being associated with Abraham's crimes, their willingness to help bring justice to his victims earned them a measure of respect and sympathy from the public. Eleanor made the decision to liquidate all of the family's business interests and use the proceeds to establish a fund for the families of workers who had been killed or injured in Abraham's factories. It was a gesture that could never fully compensate for the suffering that had been caused, but it represented a genuine attempt at making amends. "Money cannot bring back the dead or heal all wounds," Eleanor said at the public ceremony where the fund was announced, "but it can provide some measure of security for those who have suffered because of my husband's actions. It is the least we can do." Marcus, meanwhile, threw himself into the work of legal reform. Using his insider knowledge of how industrial corruption operated, he became an advocate for stronger safety regulations and workers' rights. His testimony before congressional committees was instrumental in passing new legislation that would protect workers across the country. Victoria chose a different path. She moved to New York City, where she became one of the first female investigative journalists, specializing in exposing corporate corruption and advocating for social reform. Her first-hand experience with the kind of evil that could hide behind a respectable facade gave her a unique perspective and an unshakable determination to uncover the truth, no matter how powerful the people involved. Thomas Whitmore continued to serve as the family's physician and became something of a father figure to them all. His courage in exposing Abraham's plan had not only saved their lives but had given them the opportunity to rebuild their family on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The manor itself stood as a constant reminder of both the horrors they had survived and the new life they had built from the ashes of the old. Eleanor eventually decided to donate the property to the state, with the stipulation that it be converted into a school for the children of working families, a fitting transformation of a place that had once been a symbol of oppression into one of opportunity and hope. Abraham Grayson spent his final years in the Boston asylum, his mind fractured by the weight of his crimes and the failure of his grand plan. The doctors who treated him reported that he lived in a constant state of delusion, believing that he was still preparing for the New Year's celebration that would never come. He would spend hours arranging imaginary place settings and practicing toasts to a family that was no longer there. His death in 1883 went largely unnoticed by the outside world, but for the Grayson family, it marked the final closing of a dark chapter in their lives. They attended his funeral not out of love or respect, but out of a sense of duty and a desire to finally put the past to rest. Years passed, and the story of the Graysons' New Year's Eve became legend in the region. It was told as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of moral courage in the face of authority. But it was also told as a story of redemption, of how a family could overcome even the most terrible circumstances and find a way to honor the memory of those who had suffered. Thomas often reflected on the lessons of that terrible night. In his later years, he would tell young doctors and medical students about the importance of being observant, of questioning authority when something seemed wrong, and of having the courage to act when lives were at stake. Evil, he would say, often wears the mask of respectability and hides behind claims of protecting those it seeks to destroy. We must always be vigilant, always willing to question authority, and always ready to act when we witness injustice, no matter how powerful the perpetrator may seem. The clock that had been meant to mark their deaths was repaired and placed in the town hall of Millbrook, where it still chimes every hour, reminding residents of the importance of vigilance against those who would abuse their trust. The inscription beneath it reads, "In memory of those who suffered in silence, and in honor of those who found the courage to speak." The legacy of that New Year's Eve was ultimately one of transformation and hope. A family that had been nearly destroyed by the evil of one man had found the strength not only to survive, but to dedicate their lives to ensuring that others would not suffer as they had. Their story became a beacon of hope for other families trapped in cycles of abuse and control, showing that even in the darkest circumstances, there is always the possibility of escape and redemption. The countdown that was meant to end in death instead marked the beginning of new lives built on honesty, compassion, and justice. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. Not just that they had survived, but that they had chosen to use their survival to make the world a better place for others. The new year that Abraham had tried to prevent became the first day of a new era, not just for the Grayson family, but for all those whose lives they would touch in the years to come. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose hope over despair, truth over deception, and love over fear. And so the story of Stonecroft Manor became not just a tale of horror narrowly averted, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of moral courage to triumph over even the most intimate forms of evil. It stands as a permanent reminder that true honor comes not from hiding our sins, but from facing them honestly and working to make amends for the harm we have caused. In the end, the Grayson family found something far more valuable than the industrial empire Abraham had built and tried to preserve through murder. They found their humanity, their integrity, and their capacity for genuine love and compassion. And that, perhaps, was the greatest New Year's gift of all. The transformation of the Grayson family's legacy extended far beyond their personal healing. As the years passed, their story became a catalyst for broader social change throughout New England and beyond. The detailed documentation that Abraham had kept of his criminal activities, combined with the family's willingness to cooperate fully with authorities, led to one of the most comprehensive investigations into industrial corruption of the 19th century. The federal prosecutors who took on the case found themselves with an unprecedented wealth of evidence. Abraham's obsessive record-keeping had created a paper trail that implicated not just his own enterprises, but an entire network of corrupt businessmen, politicians, and officials who had enabled and profited from the exploitation of workers. The investigation, which became known as the Stonecroft Revelations, ultimately led to the prosecution of over 50 individuals and the implementation of sweeping labor reforms. Eleanor Grayson, in her newfound role as the family's moral compass, became an unexpected advocate for workers' rights. Despite having lived a sheltered life of privilege, she threw herself into understanding the conditions that her husband's workers had endured. She spent countless hours interviewing the families of men who had died in Abraham's factories, listening to their stories of loss and hardship with a compassion that had been suppressed for decades under her husband's tyrannical rule. "I cannot bring back your husbands, your fathers, your sons," she would tell these grieving families, "but I can ensure that their deaths were not in vain. We will fight to make sure that no other family suffers as you have suffered." The compensation fund that Eleanor established grew beyond anything initially envisioned. As more of Abraham's assets were uncovered and liquidated, the fund expanded to provide not just financial support, but also educational opportunities for the children of deceased workers, medical care for those injured in industrial accidents, and legal assistance for families seeking justice against other corrupt employers. Marcus Grayson's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. The man who had once been groomed to inherit his father's empire of exploitation became one of the most effective advocates for workers' rights in American history. His insider knowledge of how industrial corruption operated made him invaluable to reformers and legislators seeking to close loopholes and strengthen protections for workers. In 1882, Marcus testified before Congress about the systematic ways in which industrialists avoided safety regulations and silenced workers who complained about dangerous conditions. His testimony, delivered with the authority of someone who had seen the system from the inside, was instrumental in passing the Federal Industrial Safety Act of 1883, which established the first comprehensive safety standards for American factories. "I stand before you not as the son of Abraham Grayson, but as someone who has seen the true cost of unchecked industrial power," Marcus told the Congressional Committee. "I have seen the ledgers where my father calculated whether it was cheaper to improve safety conditions or to pay the families of dead workers. I have read the correspondence where he and his associates discussed which journalists and investigators needed to be discouraged from pursuing their inquiries. This is not business as usual. This is systematic murder disguised as commerce." Victoria's career as an investigative journalist flourished in the years following the Stonecroft incident. Her articles exposing corporate corruption appeared in newspapers across the country, and her fearless pursuit of the truth made her both celebrated and reviled, depending on whose interests she was threatening. She developed a particular expertise in uncovering the kinds of elaborate schemes that her father had employed, using her intimate knowledge of how such operations worked to expose other corrupt industrialists. One of her most famous investigations, published in 1885, revealed how a consortium of railroad companies had been deliberately causing accidents to eliminate union organizers. The investigation led to criminal charges against 12 executives and resulted in the first federal legislation specifically protecting the rights of workers to organize. "My father taught me, inadvertently, that evil often wears the mask of respectability," Victoria wrote in the introduction to her collected works, published in 1890. "He showed me that the greatest threats to human dignity and life often come not from obvious villains, but from those who have convinced themselves that their crimes are justified by their position or their goals. This knowledge has guided every investigation I have undertaken." The children, James and Sarah, grew up with a unique perspective on power, responsibility, and moral courage. Their early exposure to both the corrupting influence of unchecked authority and the redemptive power of truth-telling shaped their entire worldview. James, as he grew older, often spoke of how the events of that New Year's Eve had taught him that position and wealth meant nothing without moral integrity. James eventually became a physician like Thomas Whitmore, but he specialized in treating industrial injuries and occupational diseases. He established the first clinic specifically dedicated to providing free medical care to factory workers, funded by the ongoing proceeds from the Grayson Compensation Fund. His medical practice became a model for worker healthcare that was eventually adopted by progressive employers across the country. Sarah, meanwhile, became an educator and social reformer. She founded schools specifically designed to educate the children of working families, providing them with the knowledge and skills they needed to break free from cycles of poverty and exploitation. Her educational philosophy emphasized critical thinking and moral reasoning, teaching students to question authority and stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. "We must teach our children not just to read and write," Sarah would tell her teachers, "but to think and to question. We must give them the tools they need to recognize injustice and the courage they need to fight against it. Only then can we prevent future tragedies like the one that nearly destroyed my own family." Thomas Whitmore's role in the events at Stonecroft Manor made him something of a folk hero, but he remained humble about his actions. He continued to practice medicine in Millbrook, but he also became a sought-after speaker on the topic of moral courage in the face of authority. Medical schools across the country invited him to lecture on the physician's duty to protect patients not just from disease, but from abuse and exploitation. "A doctor's oath is to do no harm," Thomas would tell his audiences, "but sometimes that means we must actively intervene to prevent harm from being done by others. We cannot simply treat the symptoms of injustice. We must be willing to address its causes, even when those causes are powerful and well-connected." Thomas also worked with law enforcement agencies to develop protocols for recognizing and responding to cases of domestic abuse and family violence. The systematic way in which Abraham had planned to murder his family and the warning signs that Thomas had observed became the basis for training programs that helped police officers and social workers identify similar situations before they reached a crisis point. The broader impact of the Stonecroft revelations extended far beyond the immediate circle of those directly involved. The story became a touchstone for the growing labor movement, a powerful example of how the wealthy and powerful could abuse their position and how ordinary people could fight back against such abuse. Labor organizers across the country used the Grayson story to illustrate the need for workers to organize and demand better conditions. The fact that Abraham had been willing to murder his own family to protect his business interests demonstrated the lengths to which corrupt industrialists would go to maintain their power and profits. "If a man will poison his own children to protect his fortune," one labor leader wrote in 1884, "what will he not do to the children of his workers?" The Grayson case shows us that we cannot rely on the goodwill or moral conscience of our employers. We must organize, we must demand our rights, and we must be prepared to fight for them. The story also had a profound impact on the women's rights movement. Eleanor's transformation from a submissive, frightened wife to a powerful advocate for social justice demonstrated that women were capable of leadership and moral courage when given the opportunity. Victoria's success as an investigative journalist challenged prevailing assumptions about women's intellectual capabilities and their proper role in society. The Grayson women show us what is possible when women are freed from the constraints of patriarchal control, wrote suffragist leader Susan B. Anthony in 1886. Eleanor Grayson's courage in standing up to her husband's tyranny and Victoria Grayson's fearless pursuit of truth and justice prove that women are not the weak, dependent creatures that society would have us believe. They are capable of great strength, great wisdom, and great moral leadership. The physical transformation of Stonecroft Manor into a school became a powerful symbol of redemption and renewal. The building that had once housed secrets and fear was filled with the laughter and learning of children from working families. The classrooms where students learned to read and think critically occupied the same spaces where Abraham had once planned his family's destruction. The school's curriculum included mandatory courses on ethics and moral reasoning, taught using the Grayson family's story as a case study. Students learned about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of questioning authority, and the courage required to stand up for what is right. Many graduates of the Stonecroft School went on to become leaders in the labor movement, social reform, and progressive politics. The German clock that had been meant to mark the family's death became the school's most treasured artifact. Every day at noon, when the clock chimed, classes would pause for a moment of reflection on the importance of using time wisely and courageously. The inscription beneath the clock was expanded over the years to include the names of workers who had died in Abraham's factories, ensuring that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Grayson family's transformation was complete. They had gone from being symbols of industrial exploitation to champions of workers' rights and social justice. Their willingness to sacrifice their wealth and social position for the sake of truth and justice had earned them a different kind of respect, one based not on fear or power, but on moral authority and genuine service to others. The annual memorial service, held at the Stonecroft School every New Year's Eve, became a tradition that drew people from across the region. Families of workers, labor organizers, social reformers, and ordinary citizens would gather to remember those who had died under Abraham's regime and to celebrate the courage of those who had stood up against injustice. Thomas Whitmore, now in his 70s, would often speak at these gatherings. His words carried the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. The events of that terrible night taught us that evil can hide behind the most respectable facades, he would say. But they also taught us that ordinary people, when they find the courage to act, can overcome even the most powerful forces of corruption and abuse. The legacy of that New Year's Eve continued to ripple outward through the decades. The labor reforms that had been inspired by the Stonecroft revelations saved countless lives and improved working conditions for millions of Americans. The educational initiatives founded by the Grayson family helped break cycles of poverty and ignorance that had trapped working families for generations. Perhaps most importantly, the story served as a permanent reminder that moral courage was not the exclusive province of heroes and saints, but something that ordinary people could find within themselves when the situation demanded it. Thomas Whitmore had been just a small-town doctor, but when confronted with evil, he had found the strength to act. The surviving members of the Grayson family had been victims of abuse and manipulation, but they had found the courage to choose justice over self-preservation. As the new century dawned, the lessons of Stonecroft Manor remained as relevant as ever. The specific forms of corruption and abuse might change, but the fundamental dynamics of power and the need for moral courage to check that power remained constant. The story of the countdown that stopped had become a timeless reminder that in the face of injustice, silence was complicity, and that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was simply refuse to look the other way. The Grayson family had learned that true honor came not from wealth or position, but from the courage to do what was right, even when it was costly. Their transformation from victims to advocates, from symbols of oppression to champions of justice, proved that redemption was always possible for those willing to face the truth about themselves and work to make amends for past wrongs. And so the story that began with a plan for murder ended with a legacy of life and hope. The countdown that was meant to end everything instead became the beginning of something new and better. In choosing truth over deception, justice over self-interest, and courage over fear, the Grayson family had not only saved themselves, but had helped to save countless others. Their story would continue to inspire future generations to stand up against injustice and to never give up hope that even the darkest situations could be transformed through moral courage and determined action. The clock at Stonecroft School continues to chime today, marking not just the passage of time, but the enduring power of truth and justice to overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression and abuse. Each chime is a reminder that every moment offers an opportunity to choose courage over cowardice, truth over deception, and hope over despair. And in that choice lies the power to change not just individual lives, but the entire world.